Good evening on this critical election night in America. It is now 8 p.m. in the East, 5 p.m. in the West. At this hour, polls are now closing in 16 states, including the key battlegrounds of Pennsylvania, Florida, and New Hampshire. The polls have already closed in Ohio and in Georgia tonight. All eyes on the high-stakes Senate races there. And let's take a look tonight at the numbers coming in already. You can see in Florida at this hour, ABC News can now project that Ron DeSantis has been reelected as governor. Talk will immediately turn to whether or not he runs for president in 2024. Now to the Senate in Florida. Senator Marco Rubio seeking a third term. He will return to the Senate. It was a race against Congresswoman Val Demings, one-time police chief in Orlando, considered a very solid candidate. A lot of talk about her as a potential running mate a couple of years ago for Joe Biden, but Marco Rubio easily wins a re-election to the Senate. In Georgia at this hour, a race we continue to watch. The results, 31% of the vote in, still very early. Raphael Warnock with an early lead, the incumbent over Herschel Walker, but this is expected to tighten as the night goes on. In Pennsylvania tonight, the polls have just closed. We're tracking this. The numbers expected at any moment. Our first batch of data, John Fetterman up against Mehmet Oz, obviously in Pennsylvania. The whole country aware of this race. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Up to the north in New Hampshire, Senator Maggie Hassan seeking a second term. She won the last time by just about 1,000 votes. 7% of the vote in very early tonight. A sizable lead over Don Bolduc, an election denier, until he then said Biden did win. He changed. There was a little bit of whiplash there in that state. But the polls in New Hampshire have grown very tight going into Election Day. This is going to be a race we watch very closely tonight. We're also watching North Carolina at this hour. The Senate race there, Sherry Beasley up against Congressman Ted Budd. Sherry Beasley in the lead, but again, early, 45% of the vote in North Carolina. To Ohio we go. The Democrat there, Congressman Tim Ryan, 10-term congressman trying to get elected to Senate in Ohio, which has gone Republican the last couple of presidential cycles, up against J.D. Vance, supported by Donald Trump there. Tim Ryan with an early lead, but again, it's very early. Governor Mike DeWine already winning his race for governor in Ohio. Those are some of the races we're following at this hour. Our entire team standing by live in the studio and across the country. ABC News Election Night in America starts right now.
This is an ABC News special, Election Night 2022. Tonight, the stakes could not be higher. Who will control Congress and state houses across the country? The key races that could determine everything, from your wallet to safety in our streets, even our climate, a woman's right to choose, and President Biden's agenda. It's all on the line tonight. So many Americans casting their vote early. A record 45 million engaging in democracy like never before. Results already coming in. Our correspondents are live all across the country, ready to break it all down. Your voice, your vote. Election Night 2022. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good evening, and it's great to have you with us here on this election night in America. We are witnessing what could be one of the most defining midterm elections in U.S. history. Millions of Americans across the country tonight determining who will control the Senate, who will control the House. The key issues, the economy, inflation, abortion rights, crime, and immigration. And in recent days, President Biden arguing protecting our democracy is also on the ballot. Of course, the president and the Democrats hoping their handling of the economy so far, their efforts to respond to inflation will be enough to convince Americans to stay the course. But this White House knows Americans are feeling this. The prices they're paying for everything from gas to groceries. Will the voters turn to the Republicans on the economy instead? The party in the White House, as you know at home, almost always faces a tough midterm election with very few exceptions. We'll dive into that tonight and take a look at this evening. These are the two numbers you will hear over and over again tonight. In the Senate, Republicans need a net gain of just 1 seat to take control of the Senate. In the House, Republicans need a net gain of just 5 seats to take back control of the House. Again, Republicans need 1 seat in the Senate, 5 seats in the House to take back control. We'll be tracking it all. 35 Senate races, 36 gubernatorial races, and all 435 House seats up for grabs tonight. The ABC News Powerhouse political team here in the studio and our correspondents across the country tonight, what they're hearing from the campaigns, what they're seeing on the ground. You can see they're ready to go live. I'm joined here at the desk by John Carl tonight, Cecilia Vega, my friends Lindsay Davis, Martha Raddatz. Everybody is here, including the 3 big boards tonight. Rick Klein, Rachel Scott, Nate Silver from 538. We have a lot to get to, but I want to get right to Lindsay Davis because the exit polls are already telling a portrait of America tonight, the issues driving the voters to the polls.
And they are what we thought they were going to be. Gas and groceries. I had the opportunity to crisscross the country, South Carolina to South Dakota, and asked the candidates what's most important to the voters in your state. They all said at that time it's the economy. That was anecdotal. Now we have the numbers bearing it out. Take a look at what voters are saying. 32% most important issue when voting, inflation. Followed not too far behind by abortion. So we're talking about more than a quarter of people saying that that was top of mind for them. And then crime, gun policy, and immigration. But I do want to focus for a moment on the inflation because, again, we haven't seen numbers like this since the 80s. And that doesn't bode so well for the Democrats because, by and large, this election cycle, you have people who are saying by 54%, we trust the Republicans to handle inflation compared to 42%. So we're talking about a 12-point margin there. And, of course, the name that looms large that's not on the ballot, Joe Biden. Take a look at his approval ratings here. 45%. Now, by and large, that's pretty much in line with what we've seen for presidents in past midterms. It's exactly 45% is what Donald Trump had in 2018. And I know you're asking who had the lowest ever, David, right? You want to know?
Please.
27%. That was Harry Truman back in 1946, just 1 year after he dropped the atomic bomb. But it might as well be just that bad for Biden because he had a number of Democratic candidates who didn't even want to campaign with him, especially in those key states, Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia.
It's always that delicate dance whether to let him come campaign or keep him at arm's length. And we've seen that from so many of the candidates, particularly in these very close Senate races where they were basically tied going into election night. I want to get right over to the big board with Rick Klein because I know we're tracking several of the states that viewers are going to watch very closely here tonight. Rick, you and I have been talking the last couple of nights about three states in particular. Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Nevada. Why are these three states just so important tonight?
Yeah, David, tell me who's going to win 2 out of those 3 states, and I'll tell you who's going to control the Senate. And here's why. Georgia was so pivotal in the last election. It could easily be the majority maker all over again. The race there isn't just about who gets more votes. It's also about who gets to 50% to avoid a runoff. Pennsylvania is the best opportunity that Democrats have for a pickup anywhere on the map. They have a retiring Republican senator in a state that Joe Biden won 2 years ago. John Fetterman and Dr. Oz gotten all that attention. And Nevada out west, we're going to be waiting a while on this one, but that has been seen as the best opportunity for Republicans to knock off an incumbent Democrat.
The first Latina Senator, Catherine Cortez Masto, in a very tight race there.
That's right.
We'll see if the ground game works in the very end. For those watching, and it's early tonight, a couple of sleeper races that didn't get as much attention. North Carolina, New Hampshire, you say could also be very telling.
Yeah, and we're starting to see the first numbers in out of New Hampshire as we covered. Mackie Hassan with a little bit of a lead opened up with not a lot of the vote in. That is so key for the Democrats to hold on to. If they lose that, it is very bad news for their prospects. We're keeping an eye on what Sherry Beasley is doing in North Carolina. Again, this is mostly early vote and mostly vote from Democratic parts of the state. I would expect these margins to narrow if Ted Budd doesn't take it over entirely. And we're looking at Ohio tonight where Tim Ryan has a lead in the early vote that's come in. We're just getting, David, our first taste of numbers in Pennsylvania. I just checked. It's the Pittsburgh area, which happens to be John Fetterman's hometown, and it's all early vote. So don't expect this to last, but we're just starting to see that roll in. This is going to be one we're watching for a long time.
It's going to be a very long night ahead. We're grateful to have you, Rick, and everybody else here as well. Let's dive into Georgia because we have some numbers that closed some time ago. Again, this is the race between the incumbent Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. Very tight. And so far, Raphael Warnock performing slightly above the benchmark where he needs to be.
Exactly. We're keeping an eye on some of the most populous counties because that's frankly where the Democrats live and where most of the voters are in the state. And you take a look at Fulton County, the Atlanta area. Most of the vote we've had in so far is the early in-person vote. It is going to skew heavily Democratic. That said, take a look at how Joe Biden did there. About 72% of the vote. Raphael Warnock is ahead of that. And for our purposes, maybe just as important, what does he need to do to break even? What does he need to do in this part of the state? He needs to be getting about 72. Right now, sitting at 75. Again, a lot of vote left.
This is really fascinating because this is a new tool for viewers at home to sort of follow along the night with us. This is the benchmark where he would need to be performing in order to have a decent night at the end of the night. He's actually outperforming in Fulton County.
Exactly. Both candidates. We see the number there. We can do it in just about every battleground state tonight.
I'm curious, big governor's race in Georgia as well. You've got the rematch between Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams. Brian Kemp outperforming Herschel Walker at this point.
Yeah, and I just looked at the numbers, and it looks like so far tonight, and of course, both Democrats are leading in those early returns. There were about 60,000 people who voted for Brian Kemp and didn't vote for Herschel Walker. Either they voted for Raphael Warnock, or they decided to vote for the third-party candidate, or they didn't vote for anybody at all. That's a big problem for Republicans. Brian Kemp, we see it in the pre-election election polls, is much better positioned to be reelected than Herschel Walker is to win a term.
Well, we said it earlier, Georgia on my mind, and we're going to be talking about Georgia all night long. Rick, thanks. I want to get over to Rachel Scott, who covers Congress for us. Rachel, we already have returns coming in tonight in several of these districts.
We do, and this is where things stand at this hour. You will see this map start to fill in as we start to get some projections. David, you mentioned it at the very top. 5, remember, that is the number that we are tracking tonight. This is what Republicans need to net by the end of the night in order to take the House. I want to take you over to the race grid because we've done all the homework for you. All 435 House seats are up for grabs every 2 years. We have crunched it down to what will decide control of the House, and you're seeing it listed on your screen here. The left are seats held by Democrats, the right seats held by Republicans, and take a look, David, we're already starting to get some results in tonight. Republicans flipping 3 seats held by Democrats right there in Florida.
And in Georgia, it looks like they picked up a race here. The Democrat has won in that race.
Yes, this is Lucy McBeth, gun control activist here. She was able to hang on to the seat. This will be a good sign for Democrats. They wanted to hang on to this seat. She's actually running in a different district, had to introduce herself to new voters because many of the congressional maps are redrawn in Georgia.
But most important thing here is there's been 3 flips by the Republicans already tonight. When you mentioned that number, that 5 seats to pick up for the House, historically speaking, that is a very low hurdle for the Republicans to have to meet tonight.
It really is. And when we look back in history, we kind of did some homework here and see how former presidents fared when it came to their approval ratings and how they did in the first midterm election. As you can see here, 2010, former President Barack Obama, 44% approval rating, lost 63 seats in the House.
Call it a shellacking, right?
Called it a shellacking. He said those losses were humbling, David. Yeah. 2018, former President Donald Trump, 40% approval rating, lost 40 seats in the House. So tonight, voters will decide whether Democrats will gain seats or lose seats in the House.
And what's so interesting here is they're all sort of in that low 40 range. So we have seen this before, historically speaking. We just have to see how it bears out with the losses. And if you're looking at George W. Bush here, we should point out, we don't want to take this away from him, but this was shortly after 9/11. The country was at war. He didn't lose seats in the first midterm. It was the second one where he said it was a thumping, right? I want to go to Virginia, though, because you were talking about this race earlier, and I think that we should bring our viewers up to speed. These are sort of the bellwether races very early on in the night. This is Virginia 7, and this involved a representative of Congress. Take us through it. Spanberger, Abigail Spanberger, how's she doing?
Abigail Spanberger, who barely won her race the last time around in 2020. She actually flipped this seat in 2018. She's a moderate. She's one of actually 5 Democrats that did not vote for House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, now running in a very tough race. We got 77% of the vote expected in. Let's take a look here. Most of this is election day vote, which is likely why you're seeing the Republican in the lead here, because most Republicans do vote on election day. This is going to be a tough race. But David, why we are watching this race is because Republicans don't necessarily need to win here. But if they are able to flip this seat, they are on track for a very good night.
And Elaine Luria, who's on the January 6th committee, another Democrat in Virginia, who said if her role on the January 6th committee costs her her seat, so be it. She said it will have been worth it. But look, her opponent is in the lead.
Her opponent's in the lead. We're getting some election day results in right now, 58%. She's in the lead, 51% of the vote expected. And so it's still a little early tonight, but you're right, David. She knew that her role on the January 6th committee would possibly turn off some of the conservative voters in this district. She said she has no regrets. These are 2 veterans running against each other in a district where 1 out of every 5 constituents was in the military.
Yeah, 2 Navy vets in this race. We'll come back to this often throughout the night. Rachel, thank you. I want to bring in Nate Silver. Yeah. Every year we come to you at the election board with the probability, and I just wanted to show people at home. Right now, we've obviously put Florida in the Republican column for Marco Rubio, and where does the probability stand now?
So it's 63. It's up from 59 at the start of the night. This was not an upset. It's impressive that Rubio won so quickly. Usually Florida was a swing state. It's been called by 8 p.m., but it doesn't shift the numbers much because it was baked into the cake, so to speak. But Georgia, if that were to go for Herschel Walker, you'll see a much bigger change, I would expect here. In that what if, they go to 80% based on that one call alone. What if they also win Pennsylvania? As Rick said, it starts to become very, very difficult for Democrats. They lose their best pickup opportunity down to just a 7% chance.
93 and 100. Let's just, for Democrats watching at home saying, what are you giving those states away yet? Let's go, give them to the Democrats and let's see what this is for them.
Put Georgia over there, throw Pennsylvania over there. And those 2 seats swing everything most of the time. Now they're at 89%.
Yeah, which explains why there's been so much attention on Georgia and Pennsylvania up to the election. Any new numbers here on Georgia coming in yet, Rick?
Yeah, we haven't seen that much, but I keep keeping an eye on these on the ticket splitters, because you just keep watching these margins right now to see Raphael Warnock with about a 10-point margin over Herschel Walker. Again, we don't want to read too much into this, because most of the vote we've gotten in has been early vote, and it's also been vote that has been overwhelmingly from Democratic parts of the state in the Atlanta area. But if you flip over to the governor's race, you start to see this different portrait of the evening emerging. Brian Kemp in his race, very close to Stacey Abrams, only 3 points behind. That is a big storyline. I think we're seeing it in New Hampshire. We're seeing it in Ohio, across the nation tonight. Governors and different candidates doing differently in the same party.
Yeah, Brian Kemp, at least according to the numbers, outperforming Herschel Walker. Herschel Walker, John Carl, handpicked by Donald Trump.
I mean, first of all, this is incredible. Rick mentioned something. There are about 70,000 people in Georgia who we already know voted for Kemp, the Republican candidate for governor, the Republican governor, who did not vote for Herschel Walker, the Republican Senate candidate. This, you have to say, comes down in part to Donald Trump. Donald Trump recruited Herschel Walker. Herschel Walker was actually living in Texas at the time, said, come back to the place where you played college football decades ago, run, got him to run against what all the other Republican leadership in the state and in Washington wanted somebody else to run. Trump got Walker to run, and Kemp on the other side, was targeted by Donald Trump for defeat. He recruited a candidate to run against him. So the Trump candidate is running considerably behind the candidate that defied Donald Trump.
Just to your right, Cecilia Vega, our chief White House correspondent. We have a few seconds left in this break, and I wanted to just ask you real quick before we go where the White House is tonight. I know they put a hopeful face forward in front of the public, but what are they bracing for potentially
Well,
tonight?
they're bracing for potentially big losses. They are very hopeful about the Senate, but the reality is they have long been aware, Democrats in general have long been aware, but very privately, that the House is theirs to lose. You heard President Biden just yesterday say that he is hopeful on the Senate, but he knows that the House is going to be a really tough one for them to keep.
And Martha Redis, you traveled this country, and you asked about, we heard President Biden talking about democracy being on the ballot in the 11th hour here in this election. People care about democracy. They do voice their concerns, but it all came down to the economy everywhere you went.
It truly did, and especially in Nevada. I was in Nevada about 10 days ago. Everyone I asked about democracy or any other issues would turn it right back around to the economy, how much their groceries cost, how about those gas bills, and especially in Nevada, the hospitality industry where there are restaurant workers, people who clean rooms. They care about this. They've got unions, a culinary union going door to door to door, trying to bring out that vote. You've talked about Harry Reid's machine there on the ground.
His machine, will it work in Nevada? That's a little later in the night, but we can't wait for Nevada, too. All right, we're just getting started here on election night here on ABC. We're going to check back in on Georgia, on Pennsylvania tonight, New Hampshire, Ohio, all of these key Senate races.